Welcome back to Corporate Fuckery, the show that unpacks the cost of autopilot ambition and what it takes to redefine success on your own terms. Today's guest is the kind of powerhouse woman who doesn't just challenge the narrative, she rewrites it with peer-reviewed receipts. Dr. Corinne Low is an economist, a Wharton professor, one of the Poets and Quant's top 40 MBA professors under 40, a former McKinsey consultant, a nationally recognized voice on gender economics, and the author of Having It All, What Data Tells Us About Women's Lives and Getting the Most Out of Yours. Her work has been published in the American Economic Review and amplified everywhere from the New York Times to Bloomberg to CBS Mornings. When companies want to understand gender, ambition, and decision-making through real economic impact, Corinne is the one they call. But what makes her a true powerhouse isn't just the resume flex. It's the clarity. She tells the truth about systems women are operating in inside without blaming the women navigating them. Corinne's research cracks open the myth that women messed up their careers, relationships, or ambitions. And instead, she shows the structure from fertility economics, which I found fascinating, meaning eggs are expensive and sperm is cheap, to financial traps, to cultural incentives, has shaped our choices long before we knew we were choosing. And honestly, that pissed me off just a little bit. And she gives us the most elegant, efficient reframe of all. Your job is a technology that converts time into money. Those two levers powerhouse women can pull to redesign their lives and reclaim their agency without guilt or apology. If you've been questioning your trajectory, negotiating your bandwidth, or wondering why your success sometimes feels like a trap instead of triumph, Corinne's data will set you free. Welcome to the show, Dr. Corinne Low.
Well, thank you so much, Lauren. That intro was amazing. I can't wait to get into it. But yeah, I would just like to tell your listeners that most of us have eaten chicken eggs, but nobody has ever eaten a chicken sperm. And right there,
Oh, true.
that shows you that women put in more when it comes to reproduction, and we deserve to be economically compensated for it.
It's so true. And my sister, I have a sister who's 7 years younger, and she's got 3 kids, little. I have 1 kid, big.
Mhm.
And she's like, Lauren, women really just need to be paid for being women. That's the bottom line at this day and age. And I honestly don't disagree with her. She will love the receipts that you bring. But I don't think that we recognize actually how we got to where we were. And most of us powerhouse women who especially are here to do the generational healing, to leave
Yeah.
it better than we found it, to create this like better world, wonder why we got into places that feel like we fucked it all up.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, amen, because that is, as you know, exactly how I open the book is
Hmm.
me being in the Amtrak bathroom, pumping on a 2.5 hour commute while I was on the tenure track at Wharton and I had a
Yeah.
baby back home. And by the way, I was also the sole breadwinner. And I was like, what is happening in my life? And that's me, the person who prior to that had spent 10 years studying the economic trade offs facing women, the career family trade off, the traps that we get into. And here I was in that Amtrak bathroom. And it is because it's society, it's the systemic forces, it's the structural problems. And so that is my problem with a structure or a construction like Lean In that says, look, girls, the problem is you. You need to try
Yeah, just do
harder.
more. Just do more. Lean in and try harder, especially from the privileged white woman perspective. But we'll talk about Cheryl Salzberg. Sorry, I don't remember her last name that well. In a
And
hot second.
Sandberg, I always forget. I'm always like, she was the CEO of Facebook. She was the COO of Facebook. She was something. But yes, she's your boss, basically. She's writing a book written by your boss that says, look, you need to work harder because that's going to make me more money. Right. And I am not your boss. So I'm not here to tell you to work harder. I'm here to try to tell you how to get more out of your life.
Yeah. And so give our good listeners here a little too long didn't read TLDR on what your unique approach to all this is. I know I talked about time versus money as the levers, but I really find the way that you distill this down and the data, you guys, the data and evidence that she has in this book is next level. But give us a preview of that and then let's unpack a little bit.
Yeah. So the framework in the book is that for us to do better, get more out of our lives, we have to figure out what we're maximizing. And economics has a really useful tool for this, which is called utility functions. And when we model people and how they make decisions, we model people as maximizing utility
Mm-hmm.
the same way we model firms as maximizing profit. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So, right here is going to be my divergence with lean in because the message of lean in is make the firm more profit. But my message to women is that no, that's your boss's objective function. That's what they're maximizing. That's not yours. Yours is utility. So, what is that? It's the sum total of your joy, meaning, contentment, fulfillment over a lifetime. At the end of your life, if you added up your personal video game score,
Mm-hmm.
that's your utility function. And only you know what it is. Only you know what you get points from, right? So for somebody, they're going to say, oh, I wish I had spent more time in my garden. And for somebody else, they're going to be like, that doesn't sound like fun, right? So only you know what you're maximizing, which also means this is an amazing tool to free you from that very human tendency to constantly compare to others
Yes.
because someone's career might be moving faster than yours. Somebody's house might look nicer. Somebody's garden might look nicer because,
Somebody's sourdough loaf might cook better than yours, and that's
oh,
fine.
absolutely. And it's going to be on Instagram and it's going to
Yeah.
give you FOMO, right? But you need to understand that only you are maximizing your utility function.
Mm.
And so then in that framework, that's how we get to your job is a technology to convert your time into money.
It's so refreshing. To me, it pulls together all the pieces that after I rage quit my job because I thought I had completely shit the bed of life in 2019, that I wish I had understood 6
Yeah.
years ago because I was taking full and sole responsibility. I'm all about radical accountability. But there were choices here that weren't my choices. Now, the reason I rage quit, Corinne, was because someone touched me. I had a Me Too moment, and then they retaliated against me for over a year. And the organization knew that this happened and did very little to actually change it. And then I was essentially asked to leave. And my brain, because of how brains work, was like, you have two options, Lauren. You can stay in this toxic family culture dynamic, or you can blow it all up. And I took door number two.
Mm.
And I really, if I had this kind of insight when I was at the pinnacle of struggle and survival, and somebody would have given me this like little opening, I'm like, hey, powerhouse woman, yeah, you have some options and some
Yeah.
choices to make here, but this isn't on you.
Yeah.
I would have thought about it differently because essentially what I did is I went way down the rabbit hole of astrology of all things. And I talk about this a lot on the podcast.
Mm.
And I figured out that my past through the stars was actually very unique and designed perfectly, even though a lot of it didn't feel that way. And that from this moment forward, I could make different choices. And you talk about this a lot in your book and in your framework around talking about future you. And I love how you gamify people's lives because I think that that's the perfect, like, we're all in the matrix here, friends. So once we figure out how to gamify the matrix and get what we want in the form of more time, more money, more joy, more creativity, that's how we win at life.
Yes, that is, yeah, so well put. And I'm so sorry that you were in that situation. And I think it's like, ironically, I think my book tries to do two things. One, it tries to give women more agency to say, hey, yes, things are messed up, but you have a certain amount of power to make
Mm-hmm.
choices, while
Mm-hmm.
at the same time relieving some of that responsibility that we feel for ending up in a situation that's not working in the first place. Because once you read the data, once you see the time use data, once you see the structural changes that have happened over 70 years to put us in this situation, you're gonna be like, oh my gosh, it's not just me. Like, I am structurally set up to fail right now.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where the permission comes from to chart your own course because you can't lean into something that's not working. And so you have to say, all right, I'm not actually going to have a equal playing field as my male colleagues at work because they have wives at home. And it doesn't matter if their wives work or their wives don't work. They have wives at home, period. Because when I look at the time use data, wives, even when they're the primary breadwinner, they're
Yes.
doing twice as much cooking and cleaning, right? So you do not have a level playing field. And so then you have permission to say, fine, then how do I make my job work for me?
Yeah.
How do I get out what I want to get out of my job? And just putting a pin in, we're going to circle back to sexual harassment and how it costs women money. So we're going to talk about that.
Honestly, it cost me the upward momentum of my career at that point. Now, I believe that I was put on the path that I was put on so I could do the work that I do. I believe that I was meant to become the corporate truth teller, understand energy, understand subconscious work. And I am brilliant at what I do in coaching and helping women become the version of themselves that they truly desire. And we all need to step in and learn how to embody those parts of us because I was fucking miserable back then. Like I was the
Mhm.
woman in
Mhm.
constant survival mode. And I wish, and why I do the work that I do is because I desire to pave the path for the women to come to not have to hit the brick wall and
Yeah.
completely want to reinvent their life by the time they're 41. This doesn't have to be the narrative, in my personal opinion. I would love your thoughts there. And then I'm going to bring some data back because one of these data points that I listened to, I was like, oh, girl, we got to talk about this, but go ahead.
Yes. So what you just said about saying, look, I had this upward momentum in my career. And then you said, but I was miserable, right? And that is exactly where I want women to focus is when they say, I'm meeting this goal. I'm being successful here. If you are unhappy, if you don't have what you want and need in your life, that goal is not worth achieving. Okay. You are grabbing a brass ring that is made out of dirt because what your job should be giving you is the ability to convert your time into money without putting all of your time into your job and getting enough money out that you can afford the lifestyle that you want. If you get a lot of money out of your job and now you can afford a super nice car and a super nice vacation, a super nice house, but you have zero time to enjoy any of those things, that is not a win. Okay. That is not how we win. Investing in your career in the world of maximizing utility is all about leveling up how much money you get out for less time put in. Okay.
Right.
That's what the goal of investing in your career is getting to that next level where you get more of your time back. Because in this utility function world where that's what we're maximizing, there is so much that you get utility from that you can't buy with money.
Mhm.
There's a lot of stuff you can buy with money, and that's where the job is useful as that conversion machine. But
Yes.
there is so much stuff that you cannot buy with money. And that's why when I tell people try to figure out their utility function, I say, picture a world where you are independently wealthy, where money is no object. How would you spend your time? What would your
Mm-hmm.
days look like?
Mm-hmm.
And what people name is not just the material objects that are in that world. They name that I would do art, that I
Yeah.
would see my family and I would feel relaxed,
Yeah.
that I would spend time in nature, that I would get really in shape, right?
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
name things you need time for. And that's what shows you that you are not wealthy if you are time poor. You are not successful if you are time poor. And so true success is finding a career that serves your objectives in terms of your utility function, converts your time into money efficiently while leaving you enough time to get those other things that you need.
Yes. Now, I have a client she is definitely the breadwinner. I don't know how much bread she bakes of her own at home. I would imagine quite a bit. And I'm sure she could be listening to this. I'm going to just fantasize that she's listening to this. I adore her. And she's like, yeah, but how do I do that? How do I get dinner on the table and work 60 hours a week? How do I have nutritious food? How do I get the laundry done? How do I not walk into a house that is, completely fucked when my spouse, who may not be the breadwinner, isn't really pulling their weight? Like you talk about this a lot in the book. And what I love is I had a very similar conversation with Heather Bonaparte about like
Mhm.
resource. I'm sure you know her. She's also connected through Olivia Howell. Um, like the resource management part of sharing the load from a financial perspective. But we don't talk enough about what it is actually costing us as mothers when we think about, oh, I've made this level of my life, but it's costing me my kids' nutrition. It's costing
Mhm.
me my weight. It's costing me my health. Like it's costing me relationships because it comes with a big price tag if you don't
Yeah.
have the time.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And that is where I would say, as soon as you get to that point, that's a mandate to change and to figure out, all right, if my job is really good at turning a lot of my time into a lot of money, okay, then I got to figure out how to turn that money back into time, okay? So what I need to do is say, all right, I'm choosing to work that much, but then I'm going to go ahead and hire the private chef, even though that feels insane. It feels so luxurious.
Yeah.
It feels
Yeah.
ridiculous to do it because why am I spending that hour when I get home from work over the stove instead of spending that sitting on the floor with my kids, right? When what I want to do is sit on the floor with my kids. And what I always point out when people say, like, well, that sounds insane, is I point out, you know what's so expensive is taking your car to the mechanic. So expensive. You ever think about what a ripoff it is, right?
It's a
But
joke.
we
Mhm.
don't question that we need to take our car to the mechanic because nobody thinks that our husbands have time to spend their weekends reading the manual to figure out how to fix this shit
So
themselves.
true. It's a
Even
great
though they
analogy.
absolutely could. Okay. The
Yeah.
same way that I can make a gourmet effing meal because I spend all my time on food
Yes.
blogs and
Yes.
watching Instagram videos to figure out how to make that meal. Okay. If they invested the time, they absolutely could fix the car. But we're used to saying men's time has value. And so we hire the expert, even when the expert charges $100 an hour. We hire
Or
the
more.
expert
Yeah. I
for
mean,
male
depending.
coded
Yeah.
tasks, for the electrician, for the
Mhm.
plumber, for the roof.
Mhm.
Okay. And you know what? Our husbands could do this. Okay. I don't have a husband anymore. That's another story. But your husbands, they could do this.
But my husband, like, you actually can't with the newer cars now these days. Like, it's kind of an enigma because
Yeah.
they're so tech focused, and we can get on a whole nother tangent there.
Yeah.
But speaking of husbands and men in general, this was the one of the data points that just made me irate. Wage gap, and I might misquote this, so please adjust my understanding here. But the wage gap, um, when you were talking about the 90th percentile for women,
Yeah.
was essentially the equivalent for the average men's wage. Did I
Yes.
get that right?
Yes.
Explain to our listeners what that actually means.
So this is a study of women and men who graduate with their MBA, and so they're going into pretty prestigious careers. And the question is, all right, we know there's this huge wage gap at the top. Where does it come from? When does it start? Because is it
Mm.
about the fields that they choose, or is it about, things up until that point when they get the MBA? And what they show is that women's and men's wages are pretty similar when they graduate. But by 13 years afterwards, the 90th percentile for women is the men's mean. And that is such an important statistic for removing blame from ourselves. What 90th percentile means, it's the top 10% of
Yeah.
women, right?
Yeah.
So the top 10% of women, right? The women who did lean in, the women who have all the grit in the world, okay? The women who
Yes.
are prioritizing career over their families, the women who are having those sleepless nights, and still they are earning the same as the average man. And what that tells us is that this is not something that we can solve ourselves by being super women, okay?
Mhm.
Because even the women who are those super women, they are not getting paid for it. And so that tells us that it is structural constraints. Those women are hitting a glass ceiling. And so again, it gives us permission to get back in the driver's seat of our own lives and say, I'm not going to lean in to that, right? I am going to figure out how to make this system work for me so that I can get what I want out of my life because this system is rigged. And so I need to start fighting back.
Yes. So we're not crazy. First of all, the system is broken and we are not crazy and we are not broken. I just want everyone to
Yeah.
hear that. And what my high achieving type A, I can do anything, I want to change the world, because that's essentially how you close this book, which I thought was so beautiful. But they're like, well, how am I going to make it better? Like, how am I that, like, what then am I going to focus on? And how am I going to continue to fight the good fight in the name of my kids and not wanting them to experience? And what's your take on that?
Well, there's so much to unpack there.
Well, that's not a loaded question at all.
Yeah.
No, but like, what are
Um,
kind of the top two or three things that come to mind? Because we think that if we just work harder, we're
yeah.
going to get the outcome that we want. And I feel like your invitation is actually take a step back, assess where you're at, assess where your levers are, and then make different choices that are going to set you up for success going
Yeah, and to define like what success means, that like I said, success cannot mean I have the big house or I can afford the nice vacation if you don't have any time, right?
Yes.
Success is when you are actually able to be present in your body,
Hmm.
present in your life,
Hmm.
enjoy time with your kids, which means saying no to a lot of stuff, right? Because and this is where identifying your utility function is key, right? If you say the number one thing that's important to me is making really nice baked goods for my children, or the
Yes.
number one thing that's important for me is like decorating my house really nicely, right?
Yes.
All right, that's fine. That's what you value, right? But for so many of us, we're getting these messages that actually what it means to be good, what it means to be successful, to be whole, to be a loving parent is that I have to make a salad that has 20 ingredients. I have to make hand decorated birthday cupcakes and home baked cookies for the bake sale. I have to
Yes.
have a beautiful house. I have to have that beautiful garden. I have to dress amazingly. My
Yes.
nails have to be on point. My makeup has to be on
Yeah.
point. And I'm going to somehow do all of that, have the same career as my male colleagues, carry twice the load at home, and by the way, make intensive investments in my kids that have doubled in the span of a generation
Yes.
from sitting on the floor reading books to driving to travel soccer games all weekend, right?
Yes.
And somehow that's supposed to add up in a 24-hour day. It doesn't. So you have to choose your own adventure of what is important to you. What do you actually get joy from doing? And then if you are able to invest in outsourcing the things that don't bring you joy to do, but you say, I do want that done. For me, that's my home being organized, for example, right? I need it to be done. I need my house to be organized, but it does not bring me joy to do it, and nor do I have the time or the expertise to do it. So,
Mhm.
yes, I hire a home organizer, and I have done that when times when that felt tight in my
Yep.
budget to do it.
Yep.
But like I said, it's the same way you say, shit, my car needs something, and you've got to find the money to do it.
Yeah.
You've got to treat the things that give you back sanity as a necessity. You just do.
I love that. So let's back it up a bit because I know at the top of the intro, we talked about sperm being cheap and eggs
Mm.
being expensive. And my eggs were ultra expensive, by the way, because I
Oh,
had
yeah.
ovarian cancer at 21. So I was down to one ovary by the time I was 21. And then I have full hysterectomy at 34. But I had one child. I got one shot at this. But give the good listeners the overview of kind of the selection process here and why, and it's probably a little late for us, especially listening to this, because my people have climbed a lot of the corporate ladder and are further along in their career. But tell us a little bit about why this was such an important decision and like how this all plays into this greater picture.
Yeah. So this is what I wrote my dissertation on is something called reproductive capital. And it's simply acknowledging that what women bring to the table when it comes to reproduction has economic value. And it goes back to evolutionary selection that the female of the species is the member of the species who makes the expensive gamete, the egg, right? The egg, chicken egg, you can eat it because it has nutrients in it, which that means it has an opportunity cost. It means that that chicken is producing that egg with those nutrients, which means she has to go get that many more calories, right?
Yep.
Which is costly in an evolutionary framework, right? Anytime you actually need more calories, you're in a dangerous and a risky situation. So women are risking their lives every time they reproduce, right? And then it only adds to it when you develop into mammals where we're carrying for 9 months, we're giving birth. Childbirth is the most dangerous point in a woman's
Yes.
life, right?
Yes.
And then you're breastfeeding, more investment because think about it, to produce that breast milk, that's another, sacrifice of your own nutrition in favor of your offspring. Whereas men are producing sperm. And as I said, you cannot eat a chicken sperm. A sperm is metabolically cheap. It does not have nutrients in it, right?
Love
So that
that.
means there's no sacrifice associated with it. And when that's the case, when there's no sacrifice, it means men are willing to fertilize as many eggs as they can. And so you end up with this divergence where women keep investing more in each individual offspring, whereas men start competing to fertilize more eggs and to have more offspring. That leads to other potential, that's like a sex difference, but it might lead to some gender differences. Like we see in economic experiments that men tend to be more competitive than women. Okay. Aside, one of the big things I push back on in the book is to say, even if there are gender differences, it doesn't mean that men's way of doing things is better or that we should be telling women that they need to act more like men. Because actually, the evidence shows that, like, yeah, men are more competitive than women. They're too competitive. There's an experiment that shows that you can get a higher payoff if you win this tournament, or you can just get paid based on what you did. And 60% of the lowest performing men who are going to lose the tournament, they enter it. They're like, I've got this. It's going to be great, right? So That was an aside, but just because there might be some differences, it doesn't mean that men's ways are better or that we should drink the Kool-Aid that women need to act differently or tame our gendered traits in order to get ahead, in order to succeed. What women bring to the table reproductively, enormously valuable. And one way to think about that is think about how rich your gay male friends have to be to have a biological child.
Hey, we're just going to let that sit for a second. How rich your gay male friends need to be to have a child because adoption is so damn expensive.
And if they want to have a child that's genetically related to one of them, that means paying for egg donation, $20, $30, $40,000. It depends on how many you need to try. Paying for a surrogate, $100,000, $150 if you do it right with all the legal contracting and paperwork, right? You are talking $200,000 to have a child because they do not have a woman in the picture, because that is the value of the reproductive labor that a woman typically brings to the table, uncompensated in any formal sense.
Damn, girl. Well, and as I was listening to the book, I was like, remember back in the day, I'm going to go late 90s, maybe early 2000s, where they were like, oh, the average load of a woman in the house is like $120,000 or something. I don't know how they came up with that calculation or the exact year, but I know you know what I'm referring to. And I was like, even that seems a little lowball. I'm not going to lie. Like, even with the statistic that you just gave, I'm like, so off the top, we should have been given, 150 to 200 just for carrying the baby. And then let's talk about all the postpartum
Yeah, if you
activities that come with
breastfeed,
it.
oh, that's a whole other thing, right? So
Yeah.
women are bringing so much to the table economically, and we deserve to get compensated for it, right? And so that is one of the ways you can is through a favorable marriage, through a marriage where you are actually being economically supported. But one of the reasons marriage isn't working for women today is that a lot of women are doing what I call winning the bread and baking it too, as you
Mhm.
referenced earlier.
Yep.
They actually are earning 50% or more of the household income. They're still doing twice the housework. They're bringing all of that reproductive labor to the table that a man cannot access except by a multi-$100,000 contract outside of marriage. And so they're not actually getting the benefit from it, right? So it's like, what is marriage actually doing for them? And that doesn't mean I'm against marriage. I actually think that a good marriage can cause a lot of economic benefit for both people.
Yeah.
But I think it is important to clock the ways in which the work that women put in so often goes uncompensated at home and at work.
Yeah. And what strikes me and now has twice in this conversation is it's Thanksgiving this week. It's Christmas next month. And the labor that just goes in to all of the holiday everything.
Yep.
And the fact that under the tree is not even a gift for most or many of, I'm just going to say many of us, generally speaking, that demonstrates a level of attention that makes us feel like there's even a sliver of acknowledgement. So as I think about that, number one, for all women out there listening, we see you, first of all. Dr. Corinne Low and I see you. Number two, how do we stop making it then less about needing that external validation to see us and more about our intrinsic value that we're bringing to the table?
Yeah. And that is why I think we have to tune into what fills my cup, what fills me up. And I'm going to invest my time in those things. And I am not going to invest my time into care labor that I am hoping to put in to get that return from a source that I'm not actually getting it from, right? So, one of the things about getting divorced that I learned is how much of the work that we do in the household was an act of love for our spouse, actually, because you realize that when you get divorced, you think it's going to be harder, but it's actually easier. And you're like, wait a minute, I went from two adults in the household to one. How did this get easier? And the answer is that you did so much for your spouse before you were divorced. And that wasn't just my experience. The data shows that women's time cooking and cleaning goes down after divorce because they were pouring some of that work really from their hearts, right? into that relationship with their spouse, but they weren't getting it in return. And so in a good relationship, so, if you're sharing this with a man in your life, right? The way to make sure that you stay married is to be taking more off of her plate than you are
Mhm.
putting onto it.
Yeah.
Because in a good relationship, that wouldn't be the case. If you suddenly poofed, snapped out of existence, your wife should be like, wow, my life got really hard. Okay. But if that's not going to be the case, if she's not going to think, then you
Yes.
are not pulling your weight in the marriage. Okay.
Yes.
So you got to do that hypothetical. But for the women who are out there, when you're looking at all of that care labor that you do, all of the work that you do to make magic in the holidays, I want you to figure out what is actually filling your cup. What do you actually enjoy doing just for you? Okay. What are you doing for your kids? And that is valid, right?
Mm-hmm.
But now focus on what do they really need? Where are you getting a high return on your investment?
Yeah.
Do they value that you hand cooked every single thing for Thanksgiving dinner? Or do they value sharing a meal around the table or playing a board game
Yep.
afterwards, right?
Yep.
And then what are you doing for your spouse? And are you getting that love and that care back in return? And if you're not, can you save some of that energy again for the things that fill you up, that feed you?
Yeah.
So it's kind of like an audit. It's like Marie Kondo for a
For
time,
life.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
As a
It's like,
former auditor, I endorse this
yeah,
method.
does this spark joy? Should I be doing this with my time? Because there are infinite things that we
Yep.
could do with our time. There is no limit to it. There is no limit to how much more beautiful somebody else's Thanksgiving dinner or house looks on Instagram. There is no limit. And the reason is because each of those individuals are specialized in that one aspect, right? The people who
Yes.
cook on Instagram, that is their job. You are every bit as good at your job as they are at making the salad with 20 ingredients that gives me
Yes.
FOMO. Okay. The
Yes.
people who are showing you home decor, again, that is their job. They are monetizing that. You cannot try to be the maximum of every single possible thing. You have to say, what is in my utility function and how am I best going to maximize it facing the constraints that I'm facing? And the book is going to walk you through that kind of step by step to break it down more in depth than we can here. But I think the biggest reframe I want people to walk away with is just to ask, to audit, is how I'm using my time aligning with what produces utility for me?
Yeah. I love that. So the other concept that I loved in this book is the sentiment of future self.
Mm-hmm.
And as I was walking this morning, I was thinking about this future self concept, and something I saw on Threads and have seen a few times on the socials is if people were watching your current life, what would they be screaming at the scene that you're currently in? And I thought that's really interesting because that's all through their model of the world. So we actually don't give a shit what
Yeah,
they're screaming.
that's right.
But if 80-year-old you
Yes.
were sitting here watching you go through these motions,
Yeah.
watching how you're interacting in all of your relationships, what would she be screaming at
Yes.
the screen?
That is so key, that difference, because one of the things that I do not think will be in your utility points video game score at the end of your life is what the neighbors thought of you, is
Yeah,
what the
who
other
gives a shit?
parents at school pickup thought of you, right? I do not think you will assign points to that. It feels bad right now. And I think that also comes from evolution. I give you a long story about our status in our community really mattering for our survival. But right now, whether someone's judging you is not going to determine whether you make it through the winter. So you've got to turn off the voice in your head that comes from your genes that is saying, like, that's really important. It's life or death, because it's not anymore, right?
Mhm.
What who does know, who does have that key to what is actually important to you is exactly that, your future self. And that lens, that framework of future me, 80-year-old me, what would she think about this? What would she want me to be doing differently is so important. And so one of the things I tell people to do is to write a letter from their future self and say, in 10 years, after I've solved this problem, if I've gotten through the thing that feels impossible right now,
Yeah.
what does my life look like? How am I spending my time? What supports do I have? How do I feel in my body, in my head, right? About my life? And then start taking steps today to bring your life more in line with that vision of your future self in 10 years, because you can. Once you kind of have that vision, right? The same way if you say women, a lot of women on this, like listening to this, are founders of businesses or
Yes.
nonprofits or whatever. And so you
Yes.
create a business plan and you say, yeah, our organization isn't there right now, but this is our revenue goal for 5 years out, right? And you can do the same with what you want your life to look like. And astoundingly, when you do that, when you get really tuned into your vision, it's going to actually help you find it, even when it seems impossible. Because there are, of course, plenty of things that you can't control. But what you can control is whether you are tuned into the things that really matter. And I'll
Yes.
give you an example from my own life about that, which is that
I
after
love
I got
that.
divorced,
Yeah.
I decided I was only going to date women, okay? And I really wanted to have another kid.
Mhm.
And I got very frustrated because I had learned all the lessons from my first marriage. And I was like, I'm going to be really rational in how I choose a partner. But then I was like, but it turns out when you're dating, you can't just like poof, magic into existence the person that checks all your boxes who you
Yes.
also want to make out with, because that's also
Yes.
important, right? And so I was like, this
Attraction is an important part of all of this.
so you're like, I was like, this isn't like, a goal in my career. I can't just like work towards it. And yet I made a love vision board and the instructions for doing this are in the book and the questions to ask yourself. And I said, what do I want a partner to look like? Right. And when I did that, then actually pretty soon after that, I went on a date with the woman who became my wife. And she checked all of the boxes on the important things on my love vision board. Okay. She cared about the same things. She cared about people. She shared an understanding of raising kids like they're human beings. She shared a passion for making the world a better place. But she wanted to live in a van. She wanted to sell all of her possessions, move out of her apartment, get a remote job, and live in a van for 3 to 5 years. Okay.
Uh-huh. I'm listening.
Yet, because I had the love vision board, right, I was able to recognize that, as immovable as that seemed, was going to be an easier challenge to solve than finding the person who aligned with you on those important things all over again, right? And so we ended up freezing embryos, deciding she was going to go off in her van for an unspecified period of time, and then we were going to have the baby when she got back. Later, we ended up compromising on exactly what I wanted to do, which is that she just
I love
didn't
that
move
for
into a
you.
van and instead moved into my house. The point is, I just tell that story to illustrate that when you get really tuned into what is important for you, even though you cannot invent the job that magically solves all your problems, you can't make money worries go away, you can't make your ex suddenly be an amazing co-parent or suddenly pay child support if he's not, right? But you find ways because you recognize what's important and you recognize what's not. You recognize what you're willing to compromise on and what your non-negotiables are. And so then you recognize, okay, because I've gotten so clear that what's important for me is time with my kids or what's important for me is time for creative pursuits.
Yes.
Now I know that maybe I need to move to a cheaper city or live in a cheaper apartment because that otherwise I'm working so hard just to pay the mortgage. I don't have time for that, right?
Yes.
Or you say, actually, because this stuff is so important to me, instead of chasing the passion career where I'm in a field that I feel really soul deep connected to, I'm going to get in a more practical career that converts my time into money because I want to get value and I want to meet my passions outside of work, right? So when you find out what's important to you, it helps you figure out your path. And that's why that is absolutely the first step.
Beautiful. So a couple things came up as I was listening to all of your lovely analogies. Number one, women at this age know more about what they don't want than they actually do want. And number two, the concept of joy, and I'll just let you in on my own. I love joy, I love happiness, I love creativity. I do think that there's a toxic connotation that comes with just be happy, just find joy, spark joy, whatever. And I always teach and guide my clients to the idea of neutrality, finding neutrality first instead of being stuck in the grind and just trying to bypass like where's neutral. My question for you then is, knowing that people are having some of a hard concept of even visualizing what they want because they've been so dedicated to their craft and their performance, how do they start unpacking that? Because they're going to have to go through and edit out a lot of the shit that they don't want before they can
Yeah.
start adding in stuff that they do want.
Yeah. Such good questions. So that list of what you don't want, is super important. That actually is a great starting point. I feel like that way with my fashion, I would always they'll be like, "What's your style?" or "What's your," and I was like, "I don't know. I know I hate that and I hate that and I hate
Yeah.
that."
Yeah.
That's a great starting point, right?
Yeah.
So define, name all the things that you don't like, and then name times where you feel relaxed, where you feel the most embodied, where you feel the most like yourself, right?
Yeah.
For me, after I got divorced and I was looking for that romantic partner, the times when I felt most like I had arrived were
Mhm.
when I was with a girlfriend, like a friend of mine. It's not somebody I was dating, like a friend. And our kids were playing together and we were cooking together in the kitchen. And I felt like I had that like community, that sense of shared responsibility. Like we would each, if one of the kids needs something, we would each step in. Right. And then I was like, oh, I could find a partnership that felt like this. Right.
Yes.
So start to journal and write down those moments where you feel like yourself and go ahead and write down those things that you know that you don't want to. I think that's a great starting point, right?
Yeah.
And start to let it take shape, that, that 5 and 10 year plan, that letter from your future self, and spend some time in that. And I think as an exercise to help, that exercise of if money were no object, what would my life look like? Let yourself do that somewhat wistful fantasy because we know we're not going to actually get that. But it does really help you tune into what's important because it's going to show you, is it really luxurious stuff? In which case, hey, you might need to keep pursuing that high paying job. Or is it having a lot of time? Or is it having a lot of relationships, right? Is it travel or is it art? So it's going to help you tap into that. And then your point about joy is so well taken. And I wanted to make the joke about does your time spark joy, but I actually don't talk about maximizing for joy.
Yeah.
And that's why the utility concept is so important. Because if you think you're maximizing for happiness, it doesn't make any sense to spend a day sitting by the bedside of a dying family member. And yet, anybody who's had that experience will say that's one of the most meaningful things you could have done with your time. Setting a limit with your kid where they throw a giant tantrum does not feel like maximizing for joy. What it's doing is it's serving our values, right? So, utility is very useful because utility takes into account that we do assign points in that video game score for the
Mhm.
things that serve our deeper values, whether they
Mhm.
feel happy or joyful in the moment or not. And I think that's really important because I agree with you. If it's joy or happiness, it's like that's this fizzy, unrealistic view of the world
Yeah.
where raising kids is hard sometimes, right? Having meaningful relationships is
Yeah.
hard. Caring for aging parents, oh my
Yeah.
God, that's hard. That's not ever going to feel joyful. And then you're like, well, am I like a chump because I'm spending my time this way? No, you were doing things that are deeply, deeply meaningful for you, and that can still be utility. And that's why I think that concept is actually really helpful.
Yes, I completely agree with you. And I think old me would have told you that I found joy at the bottom of a champagne bottle. And current me has a number of hobbies and
Yeah.
things that I do fill my cup back up with. And I don't run on the sacrifice treadmill
Yeah.
anymore. I want to make sure you just have a few more minutes because I know
Yeah.
we're getting close to time here. I love our conversation so far. I think it's so, so powerful. But as we think about that next evolution of ourselves and women who are at this ledge of leadership, right? I believe that this generation, not to add more responsibility because we are healing generational trauma and addicted to self improvement and
Hmm.
trying to raise aware kids, but we are also bridging between this masculinated female who is kind of the
Hmm.
elder within our workplaces. I'll say that she's
Hmm.
probably like a Gen X, maybe still a boomer, but probably not
Hmm.
because most of them, many of them are out of the workplace now. But like we are the bridge that's setting a
Yeah.
new way of living. How
Yeah.
do you see that going? And I think you talk about some of these ideas at the end of your book, but I would just kind of love a little bit of your TLDR here as well too.
Yeah, and that's so important because I feel like those women in the workplace often they had to make sacrifices that we are unwilling to make. And so
Yes.
it's difficult because they say, "Oh, that's my role model," but I don't actually want to aspire to look
No.
or live like her, right? Because her life it doesn't have all of the stuff that I think is important in it. And that's that Sheryl Sandberg trying to yell at you to say, "Hey, just keep leaning in," right? So I think that that's such an important note, and especially, and I dive into this more into the book about the way that we parent our children having changed and how we spend our time with our kids changing, and that's something that the generation before us really doesn't understand because if you think about our childhoods, like we were biking outside my
Yes.
bedtime routine was go to bed, which meant that
Yes.
my mom was then someplace else,
Yes.
having time, having fun, having a life. But then what I will flag and push back on is that I think in my mom's generation, like she was the protagonist of our household, of our lives. And we often let our kids be the protagonists of our households, right?
Interesting observation.
Everything is in service of them. And so I do think that that's a note for like part of re-embodying, getting back in the driver's seat of our lives is like letting yourself be the protagonist of your story. And it doesn't matter if you are 41, if you're 35, if you're 50, like you still get to be the protagonist of your story. You still get to have fun and you get to dress up and you get to do things that, that just because you enjoy them and not because it even, serves your kids or serves the household. So I think that that's an important note of balancing those things, right? Is that we're balancing serving our deeper values while still understanding that our experience of our lives does matter. And that's the story that I want women to start writing for themselves.
Amen. And I had someone tell me the other day, she's a little younger than I am and very advanced in her career. She has a very cool career and has a great career trajectory. And she's like, I wish I had never gotten in to this. I wish I had never dedicated my life to this craft. And I'm thinking long and hard about my legacy and like what I actually want to live. So when you think about all of these topics that we talked about today, and yeah, it might piss you off a little. And if you're feeling a little frustrated about how we got here, please know that you now have a reason to understand it more clearly. But also, please know that you have your own agency from this moment forward to choose what's best for you. And I always say what's best for you is best for the entire universe. And that goes for every coworker, every spouse, every relationship, every child's
Mhm.
life that you're going to touch going forward, because that's
Yeah.
how we leave it better than we found it.
Yeah, that's so key. And that's another thing that I talk about with kids that like if we don't put on our own oxygen mask first, like we
Yes.
can't put on their oxygen mask, right? And you think that your kids need like these activities and these toys and they need
Yes.
the this meal and they need the house to look a certain way for Christmas. They need you to be able to let your shoulders down because you're getting your needs met. And when you're that person and you show up as that person, that is more meaningful to them than anything else that you could provide. And so I think that's so important that you're absolutely right that there is no way for us to really put good out there into the world if we are not full ourselves. And
Yes.
it's true, right? It's like when we are in that scarcity mindset, the energy that we're putting out there is all that like negativity. And so again, this is a little point to the husbands out there, right? Is that
Uh-huh.
like it can feel like a zero sum game. Oh, if I take the time to do this task, that's time I don't have to work, or that's time that I don't have. But if you actually take the time to fill your wife's cup, she is going to have such a greater capacity to give back to the household, right? So
Mhm.
you are going to feel that come back to you, right? If you actually give her the thoughtful Christmas gift, if you
Yes.
actually take something that's on her to do list and you do it without asking 1,000 questions first, right? It is going to restore her capacity to give to you, to give to the household. And that's where economic surplus comes from in a marriage is that actually like what you're doing for me gives me more than it costs you. And what I'm doing for you gives you more than it costs me. Right. So I think that is a place that we need men to step up. And I hope that some of the language in the book and the tools that I have are going to help you have that conversation with your husband about saying, hey, it's going to be more fun here
Yeah.
if I'm getting my needs
You are
met.
going to be happier,
Yes.
husband. It's true. At one point in my marriage, I've been married for 20 years. I went to my husband. I said, this is what you can reapply for the role of being my husband, but here's what it's going to take for you to be my husband going forward and what I need. Because I had changed the rule book of
Yeah.
who I was
Yeah.
so significantly
Yeah.
over all of the work that I did.
Yeah.
And I never knew how to articulate that. And
Yeah.
I felt bad. I was like, I've completely shifted from the woman who walked down the aisle
Yeah.
at that point, 17 years previously, to what I was hoping and expecting and desiring for myself and for us. And I was like, but I pulled the rug out from under him. But at the same time, I didn't want to be married to someone who wasn't going to try and meet me. And he didn't want to be married. So it's like you have to figure out how to negotiate that in a way that works best for you.
But of course you did, because that's what we do. We
Mm.
evolve because we, start out as girls and we become mothers and wives and corporate badasses, right? Powerhouse women. And
Yes.
so that's exactly right. Our relationship needs to grow with us. And that's why it is never too late to actually have that conversation to, as I say, promote your husband to co-CEO of your household
Mhm.
and what that actually means, what that job description actually looks like.
Yes. And I fantasized as I was listening to this book that you would write a book for all the late teens, early 20s,
Mm.
mid 20s, like generation, so that they could understand some of this structure. Your book does a beautiful job, but it's written in that narrative so that if 22-year-old me had read it, she would see how these dots connected differently so
Mhm.
that by the time she was 41, she didn't want to blow everything up. By the
Yeah.
time she was 41, she didn't feel like she had been tricked or duped or made some shitty decision. And at some point, we can't control all the variables. But had there been a more open dialogue about what these choices actually led to, I believe we would be making, believe we would have all made different decisions
Yeah,
previously.
100%. And I wrote the book for the women like us who are in the thick of it, but I
Yeah.
also wrote it for like my students who I was
Yeah.
talking to and who are navigating these choices right now. And I was like, I want them to know that there is research out there, that there are tools, because yes, I'm the same way. If I hadn't, right, I probably would have made some different choices and taken a different path. And so, I think it's so important that we're having these conversations. And I think it is so important that we start having them really early before the reality hits them. And one of the things, I'm going to circle back to your story of sexual harassment.
Yeah.
I tell my students, I want you to think right now and have a plan for what is going to happen and how you're going to react when you're sexually harassed. Because that's not an if, okay? That actually is a win because the data shows that 25% of women every year experience some form of sexual harassment. So it's actually something that you need to go in being like, the first time I think I'm having a professional conversation and somebody asks me for a date or asks me an inappropriate question, how am I going to react? The first time my boss touches me inappropriately, how am I going to react? Because these are things that actually are going to happen. And again, as I said, they cost women money because too often when they weren't expecting it, and so they tried to get the job at the engineering firm, they're sexually harassed, and then they say, all right, I'm going to switch careers. And it tends to be into a lower paying role. So
Yes. Yes.
that's why we need to have these conversations early and we need to have them extremely frankly about what we actually are facing out there.
I mean, my mind, I'm sure you just saw my face because I was like, oh my God. I saw 19-year-old me who used to
Yeah.
work at the hospital. I had this respiratory therapist that used to follow me around because I would work like the 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. when I was in college shift. And he's like, hey, would you just smile for me? And like it got to the point where like I would just avoid him. And I ended up in HR
Yeah.
and he, of course, was sexually harassing other women too. But like it was so uncomfortable. And it's crazy that us as the women who get harassed then carry all the shame that comes
All
with it.
shame.
So
Yeah.
with that conversation needs to be and the shame isn't yours to own because there was nothing that you did wrong. Similarly to like when I was at Nordstrom, it was the chief information and security officer who was harassing me. Like it wasn't just some
Yeah.
program manager I
Yeah.
see somewhere. Like he had great responsibility within our organization. And I was so angry. And HR was like, oh, yeah, like we've had a conversation with him and it shouldn't happen again. Well, 9 months later, 12 months later, I was blowing up my career because I couldn't take any more retaliation.
Because sexual harassment is not a personal act, it's an economic crime committed against women as a class. And that comes from Rebecca Traister, who's done great work on this. But, it is an economic crime. It is keeping women out of the labor force. It's stealing from them, it's stealing their careers and stealing their potential earnings. And so, absolutely, it is not your shame to carry. And yet, I think that we can have these conversations to normalize it, to recognize that actually everybody has a story like the two that you just told. And we cannot deny that it actually has impacted and shaped our careers. And for me, as like a young economist, the craziest thing was that I remember being so relieved to be pregnant with my son and go to conferences with my big pregnant belly and know that I could go up and talk to some guy and he wasn't going to hit on me. He wasn't going to ask me for a drink
Oh my
afterwards.
God. Yes. I mean, for sure, though.
So that's the extent of that's a relief. And now actually aging out of sexual harassment is actually a relief. So yeah, for the women listening, absolutely, it is not you, and but that just shows you why we have to write our own rule book because the one that's out there is not
It's
written
so
for us.
archaic. It is
Mhm.
so archaic and it doesn't serve who we are in this moment or who we're becoming. And I think just the last point that I would love to get your perspective on is knowing that this system, this corporate system specifically, this societal system of being a woman, kind of the same. It doesn't like same, right? We haven't really drawn that parallel here today, but there is a lot of similarities here. And knowing that we can't go back and rewrite anything. We can only write going forward. What is your message to powerhouse women who are harboring some resentment or
Mhm.
negative emotion around this shouldn't have happened, this shouldn't have gone this way, so that they can move forward in who they really truly are destined to become more than they are right now in the situation that they're in?
Yeah. So the framework, again, from economics of constrained maximization is really helpful, which is that of course, we are facing constraints. Sexism is a constraint, sexual harassment is a constraint, our husbands might be a constraint. Of course, we're facing constraints, but we still have agency to maximize within those constraints, right? And so that's where you are in the driver's seat is that you can see those constraints and then you can say, all right, how am I going to dodge and duck them and push their limits and still get as much out of my life as I can? And so that the book is not going to try to gaslight you to pretend that those constraints aren't there, right? Because I think that's so ridiculous. It'd be like, oh, it's only the limits of your imagination that are holding you back. It's like, no, that's not true. There are very real constraints. And there are the constraints of you might be divorced and your ex doesn't pay the child support. Very real constraint. Okay.
Yes.
And the constraint of getting sexually harassed at work. Absolutely. Very real constraint. But then you get to maximize within those constraints against those constraints according to your utility function. And knowing that those constraints are there and knowing that they come from the system, it gives you permission to say, I am going to pursue my utility function. I'm not going to try to use my life as a battering ram against these societal barriers. Instead, I'm going to try to write a new rule book that works for me that takes into account these constraints that I'm facing. And once you do that, once you find that maximum facing those constraints, then the next step is even pushing further to find those level ups that remove some of those constraints,
Yep.
right? So you can say, hey, I need to earn this much money to pay the bills. Well, only if you live in the city that you currently live in, right?
Yep.
That's
Yep.
the type of thing that's a level up. Hey, I can't deal with this thing at my job and they only pay me this much money. Okay. Sometimes actually sending out a few resumes is a potential level
Excuse
up.
me. Hmm.
So, those are some of the things that I talk about to give you the tools, as I said, to still feel like you're in the driver's seat, to still feel like you have agency, even if we acknowledge how fucked up it all is out there.
Amen. And that's why I do the work that I do. And that's why I loved reading your book, is because I can help you reframe and overwrite. We didn't even get into the subconscious mind. And I know you don't necessarily talk about it like that in the book, but really that your mind is a lot like the algorithm in terms of, how
Mhm.
we're thinking about things. And that's what's been powerful in my journey and why I am a clinical hypnotherapist. I'm a board accredited NLP practitioner. Like I have all these tools on board to help you change your perspective of the world so that you can think differently about what's
Mhm.
possible and what has been so that you can continue using that agency for your highest good.
Well, thank you so much for having me on, Lauren. I
That was a
enjoyed this conversation so much.
It was the perfect ending. Dr. Corinne Low, thank you so much for being here and I look forward to having you on again in the future.
Great.
All
Take
right.
care.
You too. If you're walking away from today's episode feeling equal parts liberated, validated, and mildly furious, good. That's the point. Dr. Corinne Low didn't just give us data, she handed us a new operating manual. One where your time is currency, your choices are strategy, and your future self is the actual CEO. The truth is, powerhouse women aren't failing. I'm going to say that again so that you can actually feel it in your body. You are not failing. You are functioning inside a system that wasn't architected with you in mind. And you know what? You are still outperforming most of the systems that you're navigating. The win isn't squeezing harder, it's rewriting the rule book in a way that honors your energy, your values, and the life you actually want to live. So here's your invitation this week. Audit your time like a Fortune 50 balance sheet. Where's the ROI? Where's the leakage? And where are you still trying to earn gold star approval for systems that don't even reward it? You get to reclaim the levers, time, and money, and design your life like it was always yours to call the shots on. Because it is. If this conversation cracks something open for you and you're ready for your next steps, book a free 20-minute consult below so we can map out what your next season looks like when you are in the driver's seat. Until next week, protect your energy, renegotiate everything, and remember, your utility function doesn't require anyone else's permission. Thanks for listening. This is Corporate Fuckery, and I'm your host, Lauren DeGolia.